Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the June 2022 edition of the St. Louis Java Users Group. So for those who don't know, the St. Louis Java Users Group is an informal group. The attendance is free. There's no formal membership list. And normally we meet on the second Thursday of every month except December, when there is no meeting. There's just too many people and things going on over the holidays for us to be able to organize a meeting in December. And when we meet in person, you can join us for food and social at 6 p.m. And the meeting starts at 6:30 p.m. with the presentation. When we meet in person, we meet in the Object Computing Incorporated OCI training room. And that's at 12,140 Woodcrest Executive Drive, Suite 310 in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd like to introduce the other members of the steering committee. So from left to right, we have Ted Doyle, Todd Zimmerman, Bruce Alspaugh, that's me in the middle, Weiqi Gao, and Kathy Zwang. You can reach all of us on the steering committee if you send an email to that address there that's at the bottom of your screen. That's javasigsc@ociweb.com. The St. Louis Java Users Group would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. So from left to right, top to bottom, we have Object Computing Incorporated. They are our original sponsor, and they have been with us all 25 years now since the creation of the St. Louis Java Users Group. JFrog has been especially nice. They sponsor the fees for the Meetup group as well as the Zoom account. So it's free for you to use Meetup to attend a meeting, but it does cost the group a subscription fee to be able to have a website on the meetup.com website, and they cover that cost. And on occasion, they'll come by and have some prizes and announcements as well. Signature Consultants and Adaptive Solutions Group are headhunters. So if you're looking for a Java position, or if you'd like to hire for a Java position, just look them up on the web and let them know that you heard about them through the St. Louis Java Users Group. They're great people to work with, and when we meet in person, they often sponsor the food. At the end of the meeting, we will be raffling 2 JetBrains licenses. And if you're watching the recording, I'm sorry, you must be present to win those. But if you stick around through the end of the meeting, we will be conducting a raffle for 2 JetBrains licenses. Elastic has been sponsoring gift cards, and they're the company behind Elasticsearch. And Intertech is a training company. So if you're looking to upgrade your skills, take a look at the Intertech website, and they have lots of great training videos there. And they have been sponsoring the Screaming Flying Monkeys, which are just little dolls that if you throw them up against the wall, they scream. They're a lot of fun, and also some coffee cups and mouse pads as well. At the end of the meeting, we will also be raffling 2 Manning ebooks of your choice. And again, like the JetBrains licenses, you will have to be present to win those. And Pearson will sponsor physical computer books as well. And tonight, I understand that our speaker will be making available 5 copies of his book, which will also be in the raffle. But we'll get to that here in a little bit when I turn things over to our speaker tonight. So thank you very much to all of our sponsors. As far as announcements go, the Strange Loop Conference is going to be coming up September 22nd through the 24th, and that's an in-person event at Union Station in St. Louis, Missouri. So if you want to get more information about that, just go to that URL there that's at the bottom of your screen, thestrangeloop.com, to find out all the details about that conference. And there are 2 more conferences that I should also mention. Yes, that's right. You saw it right. Java 1, after the long hiatus, is coming back. Uh, and it will be this time in Las Vegas, October 16th through the 22nd. So if you want the details for that, there's the URL right there, oracle.com/cloudworld/Java1. A little more local, the Kansas City Developer Conference, and that's organized by I call him our next door neighbor, Chug. That was our speaker last month, Billy Carando, who works for Oracle, is involved in putting together the KCDC conference, and that will be August 8th through 10 in Kansas City. Early bird registration is now open, and you can get the information about that conference at kcdc.info for all the details. So as far as upcoming presentations go, on July 14th, we have a whole bunch of folks from IBM will be giving a presentation on thriving in the cloud beyond the 12 factors. And they're going to have, it's not just Rich, he's got a whole bunch of people here with him. So that's going to be an interesting one with multiple presenters talking about going beyond just 12-factor authentication, 12-factor services there. So that should be pretty good. I'm looking forward to that one. Now, if you want to keep up with our presentation schedule, that's easy to do. Just watch our meetup group. Just go to meetup.com/gatewayjug. And as soon as we get presentations scheduled, we just post them there on our meetup group. And it's okay. You can just go ahead and RSVP there on the meetup site as soon as they're posted. And then that way you'll see the presentation calendar as presentations get updated. Also, if you would like to give a presentation or become a Jug sponsor, we're always looking for presenters and sponsors. So the best way to contact us on that is to send an email to that same steering committee email list that I gave you before. That's javasigsc@ociweb.com. So for tonight, I've been really looking forward to this. This presentation won a DevNexus Rockstar Award. And I was actually at DevNexus when Ken Cousin gave that presentation. And I remember sitting in the back of the room thinking, I think I want to have this guy come by St. Louis Java Users Group. He's pretty good. And then wouldn't you know it, at the end of the conference, he got one of the Rockstar Awards for such a great presentation. So I'm looking forward to this. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click the stop sharing button, and that will allow Ken to share his screen. So Ken, why don't you go ahead and take it away? Yes, okay. I can see your screen right now.
Okay, and I made sure to default to the right page here. Make sure that's all set up well for you. So at any rate, here's the slide deck. When I share my screen on Zoom, it messes up the layout of my windows. And for some reason, I've never quite understood, when you share out your screen, it closes the chat box too, for some odd reason. So I have to re-enable that. There we go. Okay, so I will let you know that I am keeping an eye on the chat box. If you see me looking down periodically, that's where my second screen is, just to keep an eye out for questions or comments or whatever you happen to have on there. So I am looking for that. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. I was in St. Louis, I guess it was a couple months ago, when the No Fluff Tour, No Fluff Just Stuff began live events again this year back in April. So I was in St. Louis for that particular event. Didn't get to spend much time there though, which is a shame because I know several people who live out there. I am, for the record, based in Connecticut. So if you have a rough idea where New York City is and a rough idea where Boston is, I'm more or less halfway in the middle, slightly more toward the Boston side. So just letting you know. Okay, now, oh, and one more thing overhead related to let you know, the slides will be available in PDF form I sent a link to Bruce, and he will, whatever mechanism you want to use to make them available to everybody afterwards is available. Whatever you want to do with that is fine with me.
Okay.
Okay, now, and I should give you my contact information. So if you have any questions or comments or words of wisdom or heard any good jokes lately or anything like that, here's my contact info. My name is Ken Cousin, as was mentioned. So it's cousin like the relative, even though it doesn't look like it. My one-person company's Cousin IT Incorporated, or as my wife calls it, Cousin It. It was her idea. Any rate, there's my email address, homepage, blog, Twitter handle. I also publish a free, emphasis on free, weekly newsletter called Tales from the Jar Side, which is hosted on Substack. So you can take a look if you're interested, or you can subscribe, or both, whatever you like. The books I've written in the past are listed there. I've got one on Java, one on Kotlin, one on Groovy, and one also that involved working with the Gradle build tool for Android applications. And feel free to ask about any of those. Of course, none of those are going to be relevant for what I'm talking about today. The one I'm talking about today is in this book here, the one called Help Your Boss Help You. For many years, I worked out the material for this in a presentation I used to call Managing Your Manager. And that's what I wanted the book to be called, but it turned out I'm not quite as original as I was hoping. Apparently that title had been used in the past, and therefore we had to come up with something else, and this is what we came up with. The book is available either as an ebook through Pragmatic Programmers, or as a physical book. You can get one at Amazon. But for the raffle, let me just mention that the book at Pragmatic Programmers will be available as an ebook in all three primary formats, so PDF and EPUB and Mobi, with no DRM or anything like that, no digital rights management software or anything like that involved. So we're going to give away 5 copies of that, and you'll just get a link. All I need for that is an email address and a person's name, so that they can send you a link. That's basically the idea. Okay. Oh, I guess I should mention one other thing. At Pragmatic Programmers, here's the homepage for Pragmatic Programmers, and you'll see that there's a new release here called Mockito Made Clear, which is all about the Mockito testing framework with mock stubs and spies. I have a new book coming out on that. That's in beta at the moment, but it's part of the Pragmatic Answers series, which means they are very short, like 50 to 60 pages, and inexpensive. It's only, it's $10 or whatever. And they are ebook only. So just letting you know that's in beta now. If you happen to take a look at that and send feedback, you will affect the final form of that book if you're interested. Okay, let me get back to what we're talking about. Okay, now I have to give you a little bit of background to say what this is about. Most of the literature that, I spent as a developer in industry, well, not just a developer, I've been in industry for, 30, 35 years, something like that. And I was a career changer, like so many people who got into IT. I started off in research science, science and engineering, that sort of thing. And I worked for a large Fortune 500 company. I was in a research division of a huge company. And I spent about 12 years there. And then I went from there. When I moved into IT, I joined a 12-person consulting group, which expanded to about 17 and then contracted to about 8, went up and down. And then I left there, and I had positions at a couple of other companies as well, one of which was management related, but most of my career has not been in management. I've been running my own one-person company. Cousin IT is a one-person company for about 15 years now. So even though I don't have a direct manager now, most of I consider my clients my managers in a sense there. And I do have some pretty strong, what I call friend of the family relationships with some companies like O'Reilly. I teach a lot of classes on the O'Reilly Learning Platform and Pragmatic Programmers, and there's a couple others as well. But I wanted to give you an idea where I'm coming from. Now, what I was going to say about the literature is if you look at the literature on management, almost everything is designed for managers. for people who want to rise through the ranks and eventually join the C-level suite, CEO, CIO, CTO, something like that. There's almost nothing written for what I consider to be working professionals, people who are much more focused on the technical details of their job than moving into management. Maybe they would consider that later, but right now their primary focus is on getting the job done, as opposed to writing performance reviews and organizing much bigger parts of the company and rising to high levels in the management hierarchy. And there's almost nothing written for people like that, who have to deal with managers on a regular basis. So all of this stuff is based on my own experiences. So make of that what you will. Although I have been discussing this with people at as many levels as possible over many years. And I tried deliberately, especially when we were working on the book, to include people whose backgrounds are as different from mine as I could find, to try to at least make sure that I don't make the silly assumption that my own experiences must therefore be universal. I mean, I know that there'll be a lot of people who have very different experiences than mine, but these are the things that I have found useful in my career. That's what I want to talk to you about. Now, again, I want to start off with this, which sounds kind of disappointing, but it's realistic. Sooner or later, conflict with your manager is inevitable. And that's inevitable because what you want and what your manager wants are different, at least in some sense. Now, I'm not saying there isn't an overlap. I'll get to that. But how you are evaluated, how you are assessed, and what you consider to be success is often different in some ways from what managers consider to be successful. And that gets down to, well, first of all, the question of, well, what do you want? Now, this is a question that's been dealt with by philosophers and psychologists and researchers for centuries. One model, which I'll just mention, but I'm not really going to dwell on, for figuring out what people want is the classic, what they call the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a picture that is adapted pretty much from the Wikipedia page. I mean, we made it slightly different, but it's not, the information is very similar to that. The whole concept of this pyramid is that lower levels on the pyramid, needs on lower levels, need to be addressed or satisfied before you can really focus on higher levels. Like at the bottom, you see the physiological needs like food, clothing, and shelter. If you don't know where your next meal is coming from, if you don't know where you're going to be sleeping tonight, that's probably going to dominate your thinking a lot more than thinking about prestige and feelings of accomplishment. It's going to be a lot harder to assess those. The thing I find interesting about this diagram is that when Maslow put it together, now again, this is a model, so it can be useful, but it is an oversimplification. Notice they put employment under safety needs at the second lowest level there. I don't really think of it that way. I think when he was talking about employment, he meant having a job at all of any kind that brought in enough income to not have to worry about those physiological needs, basically, that this was something to get you above the bottom level. That's not the sort of job I'm thinking about, because I'm generally considering the people I'm talking to are working professionals. And when you're talking about a career, you're talking about something that gets to those levels of esteem with prestige and feelings of accomplishment. So here's the question then. Well, if that's a rough idea of what people want in general, what do you want from your job? Now, again, this is something that's been bandied about for centuries. There's an old quote that's attributed to Aristotle, of all people, that goes something like this: is happiness is the exercise of vital powers along lines of excellence in a life affording them scope. And while you can debate what that really means, here's my interpretation of it. Most of the people I know want a career that gives you enough autonomy that you can make decisions, not only about the sorts of things that you work on, but what strategy to take, how to go about solving problems, how to go about accomplishing your tasks. You have enough flexibility to make decisions in that area. And you'd like a job that allows you to use your strengths, that plays to your strengths, not your weaknesses, but also allows you to learn more as part of your job and develop both as a professional and hopefully even as a person, although that's a lot to ask out of a job. The thing about all of those characteristics, however, is those are satisfying internal needs, what they call intrinsic motivations. They're not really from outside. I mean, they're indirectly they are, but this is also why sometimes companies have a great deal of difficulty coming up with a reasonable compensation plan, because how does compensation play into that? It may or may not, it overlaps, but it's really hard to tie into the intrinsic motivations that all professionals want. But then the question becomes, let me address that issue of being a professional again. I do want to define that a little bit. When I say that someone is a professional, I mean someone who cares more about their career and doing your job the quote right way, whatever that means, and whatever your job is, building results that you can be proud of, that earn you respect and hopefully rewards as well. So when I say care about this, I mean care about this more than necessarily just rising through a hierarchy in a hierarchical organization, getting promotions and becoming a high-level executive. Now, I want to make a distinction there between, when I use the term manager, I mean someone who's basically a line manager, whose primary responsibilities involve things like assessing individuals and helping them develop in their career, but working on raises and promotions and performance reviews and that sort of stuff, in addition to whatever other responsibilities they might have. That's as opposed to a job that many of you have no doubt have had or have now, which would be a team lead, someone who's leading a group of people to try to accomplish a particular task. Generally, you don't need a lot of advice on how to work with a team lead, because their priorities are pretty much the same as our priorities. It's just they're in charge of a project that's bigger than any one person could do by themselves. So they have additional responsibilities regarding scheduling and maybe budgetary things like that, but they still want to accomplish a technical task in the right way, building something they could be proud of. No, I'm more talking about dealing with the people who plan to be managers and to rise in the management ranks in general. Now, the challenge then becomes, well, if conflict is inevitable, I mean, all those things seem reasonable. What does your manager want? And the thing is, we say, don't they want the same things we want? Well, they do, as long as those things make money, making money for the company. See, this often happens, especially to what about a manager that manages managers, which is a comment that was in the chat box. Yeah, I'm going to address that to some degree. I think a lot of the advice and the suggestions I'm going to give work in that environment as well. But right now, I'm mostly focused on people trying to accomplish technical tasks and having to deal with managers anyway. But you let me know how much the individual recommendations translate to a purely management-based environment. I like to believe they do, and I've talked to a lot of managers about it, but that isn't necessarily the inherent conflict that is going to arise here. When I say make money, by the way, I mean money for the company. This is something that, like technical people who get promoted into management discover somewhat to their, well, I won't say horror, I'll say maybe disappointment, is that suddenly the financial aspects of the job, which they kind of tolerated before, but didn't really want to focus on, now are suddenly important and are influencing their own reviews, their own assessments, that sort of thing. And that means that the manager's job is different from ours, and therefore the evaluations are different. And that means, of course, their priorities and their incentives are different from ours as well. And that difference is going to lead to conflict. Now, I want to emphasize this for a moment, talk about the money aspect. When I use the term money, I'm using it as kind of a catch-all for everything related to the budget, to resources like cloud providers, or buying a licenses for software, or anything like that, as well as also other contractors or other individuals brought into the organization. So it's kind of a catch-all for all of that. And managers care about this stuff generally a lot more than individual contributors do, because they're not as directly impacted by it as long as they have enough money to get their job done. Now, the thing is the higher you go in the management hierarchy, or the higher the level of manager you interact with, the more that comes to dominate everything. I have a friend who's retired now, but he was a senior vice president at a Fortune 500 company. We were in the same company, but different divisions. So I didn't report to him directly or anything, but that's how we were able to be friends. I didn't report directly to him. He was a senior vice president in this division, and he would tell me that if a technical problem ever reached his level, where something was so bad that he felt the need to deal with it, that he would have a meeting with all of his direct reports and the people who were, affected by that particular problem. And the entire meeting kind of boiled down to, what's this going to cost me? What am I going to have to pay to get out of this problem? And we're going to have to pay a fine. Are we going to have to purchase some hardware? Are we going to have to hire some contractors to fix something quickly? It was really all about, what's the dollar value? What is this going to cost us? And how do we buy our way out of it? And then at the end of the meeting, once they made a plan, we'll try this. And if that doesn't work, we'll try that. Then the technical people used to come up to them and say, hey, do you want to hear the actual technical details of this? Now, in that division, they tended to hire from within. I mean, they promoted from within, I should say, so that everybody had an engineering background. They all started off that way. He just moved into management pretty quickly. And of course, he liked having that discussion. I mean, since he did have ultimately an engineering background. But the point was, all those technical details and everything, that was an entirely secondary discussion to the financial one, the one that was involving the money aspects of the problem. There's a comment there. My superiors are so concerned about money, they can't really do anything about it. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too, because that's a fundamental problem that especially is symptomatic of low-level managers, the sorts of low-level managers that we as working professionals tend to interact with a lot, because we're not on the management chain in many cases. Now, I like to draw it as a Venn diagram. And you have your agenda for your job, for your career, for your life, what you want and overall. And of course, your manager has an agenda for their job and their career, their life. And we try to operate in the overlap. And there should be an overlap. I mean, otherwise, why are we working together in the first place? So there probably is, but we have to acknowledge that there are circumstances that will arise that fit our agenda and not the manager's, and vice versa. And this is going to produce conflict. Now, I'm going to give you an example, although I need to maintain some plausible deniability in this particular example. So I'm going to say, oh yeah, this never actually happened to me, at least formally, as far as you know. Say you learn about a new technology. You go to a conference, or you read a blog post, or you're talking to some people, whatever it might be. You go and see a presentation, say at the Gateway job, okay? And you learn about a new technology you'd never used before. And you think, wow, I want to try this out. I think this could be really useful for me, both as something could be good for the company, but also it's a nice thing for me to learn, because it seems to be a pretty hot topic these days. So that if you went to your boss and you said, I'd like to carve off a piece of our current project and apply this new technique to it, this new language, this new skill, whatever it may be, that's going to be kind of a hard sell, because you're going to be saying things like, well, it's got benefits, although they're really hard for me to describe. And I know there'll be issues, but I don't really know them yet, because I haven't really done this before. And we don't have anybody else in the group who does this. I just want to learn it. I mean, that's a tough sale to make, because what you're really doing is introducing a lot of uncertainty into the project. So what you might do, and I've known people to do in the past, is to carve off a little piece and work on it, quote, on your own time, So I'll just try it, see how this works. I'll set up this new framework and see if it's as cool as it seems there. And you work on it. And of course, your own time tends to creep into work hours anyway, especially, and you don't feel too bad, because after all, it is a work project. It's just not really the way we plan to do it, but it is related. And let's take the happy path on this. Let's say it works. Let's say you overcome all the hurdles that you would normally encounter as part of a normal learning curve, and you make it work. So you have a meeting with the boss, maybe the whole team. You get together and say, hey, look, I tried this little technique on part of our project, minimizing all the difficulties you ran into along the way, and look how great it came out. Now, if you're really lucky, your boss's response to that is, oh, cool, because now this does work and it looks to be very beneficial. And not only that, you've added a new skill to the group that the manager can then market to other clients or other groups within the company, however it works, wherever you happen to be. And that's great, except that you've now introduced what the manager would consider to be a single point of failure into this project, because there's now a whole section of the project that nobody else can maintain but you're the only one who understands that new framework or the new language, whatever you used. And now you're going to have to be the one to handle that. And what if you're not available? I mean, I could be not available for good reasons, just that, oh, wow, this attracted so much interest that suddenly you've got all this work coming in. Or it could be that you got tied up with other work and just are not available normally. Or maybe you do what you just demonstrated you're likely to do, which is to fall in love with some other new technology and go off and do that without telling anybody. Or maybe you even wind up leaving. And the manager thinks, wow, the only way I could protect myself and protect the company is to say, well, say to you, we've got this junior person that we wanted to bring along, this rookie here, and I'd like to have you train that person and show them what you did and have them learn enough to be able to maintain this system in case you get busy or whatever. And if you're at all like me, you might hear that and go, wow, my reward for doing this cool thing is that my boss wants me to train my lower cost, more malleable replacement so that somebody can do this without me. And that doesn't feel like a good reward. I mean, it feels like a threat, actually. And the point is that both sides made decisions and followed their own agenda in ways that were not dishonest, that made sense, but wound up with a conflict, wound up with a problem that was perfectly natural, just because what you want and what your manager wants are different. Now, I'm going to come back to that example again later, but let me move on now. Comment as if everyone else understood everything about all the other frameworks we're using. Yeah, I always say there's two facts of life in the IT world. One is that there's never enough time to learn everything you need to know. And the other is the stuff you've already learned changes, right? They come out with a new version and it's all different now. It's just amazing how often that happens. At any rate, there's another complication here too. And that complication is that your manager's probably not very good at their job. Now, I don't mean to put down any managers. There are good managers out there. But here's the thing. If a manager really is good, they're always going to be looking for the next opportunity. They want to move up. They want to find an opportunity. If they really are so good that they're likely to make it to that C-level suite, something like that, then they're always looking for the next chance to take more responsibility or work in a different part of the company that they didn't know before or what have you. If you have a really good manager, again, you don't need a lot of advice on how to deal with them. They'll tell you. If you do something they don't like, they'll talk to you about it and explain it. But if you have a good manager, well, enjoy it, because it's probably not going to last very long. Now, there's another reason that most managers that we deal with aren't necessarily all that good at the job. And that is, as technical people, we're not on that management hierarchy. We're not looking to be on that hierarchy. And that means the managers we tend to deal with are on the lowest rung of the management levels. See, now in IT, as a developer, you go through academic training or you go through training of some other kind. Somehow, I mean, everybody in IT knows some developer who has very little in the way of academic training, and yet they're phenomenal at their job. I mean, that seems to happen in IT fairly often, but still there was a real learning curve. There was a lot of things you have to know and you have to keep learning overall. Managers don't get a lot of training until they have demonstrated that they are already successful at it. I mean, the company doesn't say to your first level manager, let's go send you to this executive MBA program. They wait until this person's higher up and getting to the level where they might turn into an executive. It's really kind of odd that the people that we encounter the most have the least amount of experience at doing the management job, and therefore probably also the least proficient. Now, that comment about the Peter Principle is a good point as well. That one is more along the lines of a technical person who was so good at their technical job that they wound up getting promoted into what is basically an unrelated skill set, a job with a completely different skill set that they have very little background for and very little training for, and suddenly they've got to figure out how to do this. And that's another reason that we wind up with a relatively low opinion of managers, because we're generally dealing with the rookies or the people who don't have a lot of skills, because the people who really do have those skills are going to move up or move on to somewhere else. Now, there's another complication as well, and it's that everybody in an organization has to act like they know what they're doing. Now, I'm going to address this a lot more as we go along. I don't mean that everybody has to lie, to act like they're sure, but you have to demonstrate a certain level of confidence or nobody will be willing to give you assignments. I mean, you're basically asking someone to trust you with a project that you will find a way and make it happen. And if you're demonstrating that you're really uncertain about your ability to do anything, nobody's going to want to trust you with their project. Nobody's going to want to give you their work. And this gets even worse on the management level. I mean, it's one thing to be confident in your own technical skills, but what about managers? It's very important for them to demonstrate confidence because, after all, a big part of their job is to convince other, especially technical people, to follow their decisions, to do what they say, even when they know, for one, they're not as good technically as their own employees, especially the senior ones. I mean, they're not supposed to be as good as the senior employees. They're not doing the job the senior employees are doing. I mean, you're immersed in your technical aspect of your job all the time. And of course, you're doing your best at that. And the manager's got a management job to do. I mean, how long do you have to be out of direct contributor level before you start feeling that your skills are getting a little rusty? I mean, it's a problem. The other problem, the other thing that most low-level managers know is they're not really all that great at it. Now, they might put the caveat yet on there, and that's perfectly reasonable. But as we say, a lot of people in the low level of management are either rookies or they're people who are promoted from a different job, a technical job, and haven't found their way through yet. They don't really know what they're doing. And this is a problem, especially because they still have to act confident, or nobody will do what they say. They'll lose the group around them, and it's a real problem when that happens. So if your manager isn't all that great, well, what can we do about it? Now, I'm going to start using a couple of words that are heavily emotion laden. They have a lot of implications to them. And I need to make a caveat on this. I'm going to use the word trust here, or loyalty. And I have to be clear that I'm not talking about trust like the trust you have in a spouse or partner, or the trust you have in your friends. I'm talking about a business relationship. I trust my manager to do certain things, and the manager trusts me to do certain things, but this isn't forever. This isn't permanent. This is a business relationship that we're trying to make work so that both sides can be productive and successful, whatever that means. And I'm going to define some of that. So the word trust comes up and the word loyalty comes up, but this is not your family, This is not, hey, till death do us part. This is a situation that you're in now, and you will constantly be reevaluating to decide, is this going to work in the long run? Is this something that I do want to commit to for a long-term relationship like that? Now, when I say trust, what do we trust the managers to do? And some of these are pretty clear. Like, I mean, I trust my manager to fight the organizational battles I don't want to fight. There was a comment, Training Institute said, if you want to be a manager, you need to be able to do the job yourself. See, now there's a trap there. I mean, yes and no, I want to say. See, the danger is that a lot of people who are, well, let me phrase it this way. There was a crisis at Google that happened. You could read about it. I don't have the actual, my phone thought I was asking a question. There was a problem at the company Google when it only had like a few hundred people as employees. You can find the links to this. I don't have the links myself, but I think I have a link in the book about the day that they brought everybody into a room, the whole conference room, and one of the top level guys, I forget which one exactly, announced that they were laying off all the managers. That the reason they were laying off the managers is that didn't like the idea that a non-engineer, as they were called, was telling engineers what to do, because obviously they don't have the technical expertise that the engineers have. Why should you do what they want to do? And this person was really surprised. We found that the people who objected the loudest to that were the actual engineers. You see, that shows such a contempt for management related tasks that somebody still has to do. I mean, you don't necessarily want to do like this one, the battling for organizational capabilities. When I was in that Fortune 500 company, we had to come up with enough funding to fund our own work for a year. That's happened every year. You always dreamed of multi-year projects that never seemed to happen. And you always had to build a relationship to get funding. And I didn't like doing that. I always hated selling my capabilities or making the awful argument that you should fund me and not that project over there because mine's more important. I mean, I didn't want to do that because how was I supposed to know? And if you were at management level, it was even worse. You often had to fund several people, to make up the deficits and to help out a little bit more. And of course, there was never enough funding for everybody to do exactly what they wanted to do all the time. Somebody has to make those interpretations of the overall priorities that are coming from the CEO, as the other person pointed out. The CEO can't know everything that's going on. They need to know the basics. They need to understand basically what's happening, but not necessarily in detail. And the question is, how much do they have to know? Well, that's always a big debate, in there. My point is that when saying that the manager should know how to do the job, yeah, that would be ideal. It would be great if they understood what they were asking. But that's not actually critical as long as they have you. You see what I mean? They get advice from their technical experts who work for them. They don't have to be the tech expert because you are. And as long as they listen to you, and I know they may not, but just assume for the moment that they do, they can make a lot of progress and learn the basics and learn the high level aspects of the problem without being as good technically as their own senior people. Okay, I'll come back to that because that's going to come up a lot more. So at any rate, one of the things I trust my manager to do is to fight organizational battles. Another is to look out for my best interests, to go to the meetings that I don't want to go to. I've got work to do. I want to go do my job, and it requires a lot of intense focus and time. I can't go to every stupid little meeting about, the benefits packages or, new priorities that may be handed down from above or rumors about mergers and acquisitions. I mean, I'm affected by all this stuff, but I don't want to have to be distracted by all that. I also, by the way, want to be able to trust my manager to defend me when problems arise. Now, I have been in both sides of this. Sometimes a problem will arise that isn't my fault. And sometimes a problem will arise that, yeah, it was my fault all along. In one case, when I was in that Fortune 500 company, I used to have one of my primary clients was in a different division of the company. They would send me funding and I would do work for them. Basically, half of my year came from them each time. And one of their managers, the manager of that group, decided he wanted to build his own little empire and bring all the work back in-house and hire more people and build up, and therefore the money wasn't going to come to me anymore. That's a problem. I mean, and I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't because I was a problem. It was because I was expensive, because I was in a different division, and that's just how the bookkeeping went. So what I needed, and in that case, fortunately, I had, was a manager of my own at a roughly equivalent level to the manager in the other division, who could get me in the room, who could make sure that my arguments to continue to work together somehow were heard, so that we could find a way to still be productive while I transitioned to finding other clients, or he decided whether or not he was actually going to build this empire, which sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So that was one where a problem arose that had nothing to do with me directly, but I needed a manager to help out on. Another problem I had is I'm a developer, and I have your typical developer skills at estimation, which means I'm really, really bad at it. I hope you're better at it than I am. I do tend to be wildly optimistic in my estimations. And yeah, I ran over budget and late deliveries and all of that. And what I needed was a manager to step in and say, yeah, the guy's not a complete idiot. We'll get this done. We'll find a way, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've had some managers who were good at that. And I've had some managers who I used to say that I was an ant on the sidewalk, and they were the ones holding the magnifying glass right on me. It was just not pleasant at all. But I do, in general, want this from my manager. I want to be able to trust them to defend me when a problem arises. There was a comment, I know a lot of very good technical people became mediocre managers for the pay. I wouldn't put it, well, yeah, obviously. In my experience, it's not generally just the money. It's this idea that they think that by moving into management, they will have more control over their lives because they'll be the ones making the decisions, only to discover to their dismay that now they're the low person on the totem pole and they have very little authority to do anything, to be honest. And now they're at the mercy of their own employees. It's a problem. So yeah, the money sounds attractive, especially if there is no technical track, or you reach the highest point of a technical track, and then any promotions beyond that involve management responsibilities. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, fine, I'll give it a try. And then they may or may not be successful. It depends. Because again, those skills are very different. Or they got to the point where they couldn't keep up with the pace of new technology. Now that one I'm growing increasingly sympathetic to as I get older. But yeah, I hear you on that one. Now, I also trust my manager to get me the resources I need to do the job. See, this one is especially prone for those rookie managers, the real low-level ones, because if you're a rookie manager and you're being evaluated on financial resources that have never been evaluated on that before, then when one of your employees asks you for something that costs money, the default answer is going to be no. Because, hey, I'm being evaluated on the money. I can't just spend money. No, you got to make a great case here. It's going to be very hard. It takes a much more experienced manager, someone with a lot more, who's been through the mill a few times, who understands, that is able to make a realistic assessment, to go, okay, I get it. This is what you need, and this is what it costs, and this is how much time you spend in front of it. Here, to give you a classic example right now, over the past few years, much of the industry has been converting from open source IDEs for Java like Eclipse into the commercial tools from IntelliJ IDEA, and their other suite of products. And of course, the problem with IntelliJ is it is a commercial tool, requires a license. And if there's a rookie manager and they don't want to deal with financial aspects at all, they're going to say, look, there's a free alternative, don't bother me. Whereas a more experienced manager is not going to be so penny wise and pound foolish, as they say. They're going to be able to make a realistic assessment of, how many hours this person spent in front of this thing. And, it is being widely adopted. It's not that expensive. Yeah, but the free community edition of IntelliJ IDEA doesn't have the Spring capabilities in it. And it's hard to be in Java for very long without encountering the Spring framework. So generally, people are going to want the commercial edition of that, by the way. There was another comment, technical track pyramid is very narrow, few high spots. Most big companies have 100-to-1 ratio managers, single senior technical roles. the way to augment what you're saying there, because yeah, obviously that's definitely true. I shouldn't say obviously, but that's definitely true. To augment that for a moment, most people are able to get their first couple of promotions because the promotions are routine based on demonstrating competence. You go from a rookie to a junior developer to a regular developer to a senior developer just from demonstrating expertise and the ability to work within the system and get the job done and everything. It's usually not that constrained by, is there a position available? But as this person pointed out, as Craig mentioned, sooner or later, you're going to hit a job where there's only one technical fellow position and there's a dozen technical senior people who all want that position. And yeah, that as much as anything is going to cause people to look at alternatives because they ran out on the promotion track unless they could find one of those very few positions like that. Overall, I expect the manager to support me in my career. Now, let's look at the other side of this. What do they want from us? What do managers trust us to do? Now, the one stated here is pretty obvious, but it seems worth stating anyway. When they give us an assignment, they trust us to carry it out to the best of our ability. Now, contrary to what junior people especially might think, most of the time when a manager gives you an assignment, they know you don't know everything about it. They know that you don't know all the details and all the steps, and you don't know what you're going to encounter when you start digging into it. So the trust is not just that you'll do your best, it's that also you'll let them know when there are problems that arise, especially early enough to, quote, manage them, to replan, especially if there's still most of the budget left in the project. We can reorganize, we can decide what to do. And that's a big issue. Now, this was a hard lesson for me to learn because I got burned by some very bad managers early in my career. And one of the bad habits I developed was that when problems would arise, I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't let anybody know until I either resolved it or it became a crisis. And I saw this happen when I got my first good manager, first really good one. I mean, I'd already been in the company for about 8 years when that happened, unfortunately. But when I got my first good manager, he gave me an assignment, and then he came in my office like on a Monday, and we scheduled a meeting for Friday to give him a progress report, what was going on the project. And Thursday afternoon, he drops by my office and says, "You ready for our meeting tomorrow?" And I started to hem and haw, and I'm like, can we make that Monday? I'd really rather, take a little bit of extra time to look at this, that, and the other. And he figured out very quickly what I was saying, which was, yeah, I haven't made progress, or I got stuck, or I didn't have what I thought I needed to have done on it. And he immediately saw through that and went, no, we're meeting tomorrow, period. If you haven't made any progress on it, just tell me you haven't made any progress. I just want to know. And we did, in fact, I figured, okay, I'll take a chance. And I went into his office the next day and I laid it all out. And I said, okay, here's what happened. I did try this and they didn't work. And I ran into this problem and I couldn't figure that out. And then I got distracted by this other task that I have to do, whatever, and just didn't make much progress at all. So he said, okay, fine, let's break it down. And we made a plan. We figured out what to do now that we identified this problem that I hadn't noticed before or wasn't aware of, and how we're going to handle it. And at the end of the meeting, he says to me, you realize that if you'd spent the weekend here, none of this would have been resolved by Monday. It wouldn't have made any difference. Then the project would just be late. And slipping deadlines is habit forming. If the first one slips by a weekend, the next one slips by a week, and then a month, and then more, and it's just a disaster overall. He wanted to know the truth on a regular basis so that we could replan if necessary. Now, again, you can't always do that. I mean, this was the first manager I had who would not panic when there were problems. But I also learned better how to interact, how to build a relationship in a way that didn't cause that panic either. Now, this idea that that Jeff pointed out here, there's managers who at the first sign of things might not work are panic. They will panic. And I had one of those for about 4 years. I called him a panic-driven micromanager. That was the idea, is that if something went wrong, he immediately wanted to take over. I mean, he was still technical enough that he never really gave up his desire to do your job as well as his micromanager side. And if I made it sound like I was in trouble, he would take over. And I will come back to that. And I'll talk about what I eventually did to deal with that challenge. You know, how did I push back? And of course, I have to admit, ultimately, I moved on to a different group, but it wasn't directly because of that. But I will come back to that. But yeah, it's hard. A lot of managers will panic on that. Now, this is the other thing that managers want from us, and it's something that IT people have a very bad reputation for. It's something that they rarely really provide. They trust us to support their decisions. Now, I don't mean never arguing. I mean publicly. As far as the outside world is concerned, we're a team. We tried this and it didn't work, and therefore we tried that, when everybody knows who made the actual decisions on all this. But they trust us to support them. Now, this is really important. This falls into this category of loyalty, or the way I want to put it is in a modified phrase. I want to call this constructive loyalty, because I cannot simply give loyalty without pushing back, without actually, you know, trying to get what I want as well out of all this. And I'm going to define how that process works, or at least how I recommend you try to make that work in order to get what you want out of it. Now, we support them. They look out for our careers, etc. But here's the dangerous thing. This is what I want to mention. You do not build a relationship of constructive loyalty by simply doing everything they tell you to do. I mean, if they know that if they tell you to do something, you may complain about it, but you're just going to do it, why should they ever care what you want? Why should they take your needs, your desires, your career goals into account when making a decision, when they know you're just going to do whatever they tell you to do? Now, make this even worse. If you get into a conflict with your manager when they tell you to do something and you don't want to do it, the organization is almost certainly going to back up the manager as well. I mean, after all, that's their job. We advise and they decide. That's the basic idea around this. And I don't want you to not do what they tell you to do. I don't want you to get fired. Obviously, that's not going to work either. So my suggestion is that there is an alternative. See, when most people get into a conflict with their manager, with someone who has what seemed like direct impact on their career, they feel they only have two choices. They can either swallow their pride, just do what the boss tells them to do, or they can leave. And the problem is both of those are extreme positions and neither of them gets you what you want. There is an alternative. But the problem is it's a long-term solution. I'll get to that next. And it also doesn't work in every case. It may not, but it's better than either of those alternatives. It gives you, I mean, if you do nothing, then you feel like you're undercutting your own interests, that you're not standing up for yourself. You're gaslighting yourself, if you will, be probably the more modern term. Or if you decide that's it, I'm out of here. The problem with leaving is, first of all, it's highly disruptive. It's always harder to do than it seems like, you know, and there's also no guarantee you're not going to hit a conflict with the next manager again. And then what are you going to do? Leave again and again and again? Maybe, but there may be something else you could try. And that's what I want to suggest here. There's a comment, as it is a valid report to say, look at these 3 ways to do something. None of them will work. Here's what I'm going to look at or try next, instead of on Monday asking for a product on Friday if it's a failure. You see, that sort of thing would happen at that meeting. That would be the discussion. Okay, I tried this and it didn't work. I'm not going to make that deadline for a deliverable. I'm not saying that you can never be late on a deliverable. I'm saying that you don't skip a meeting. That the meeting where you report what's going on is much more important to adhere to than the delivery date necessarily, because the delivery date is affected by many, many, many things. And especially now, again, this is partly my own experience, but I was ducking the meeting because I didn't want to look bad. And that was not a good reason to duck the meeting. That was basically the idea. Now, nobody wants to look bad, but if you build a relationship with your manager where both sides can have these sorts of discussions, then you can still meet even when things are going to be bad for one side or the other, bad being a relative term, being uncomfortable or awkward, and then discuss what to do about solutions in order to satisfy some deliverable schedule, which may or may not even be remotely realistic on that. Now, before I get to the actual mechanism I want to talk about of how to push back against your manager, I want to give this a global picture of there are two messages you want to keep in mind whenever you interact with your boss. There's two messages you want to send to your manager whenever you interact with them. And I'm going to express them very informally as, I got this. That's the confidence message. I'll handle it, versus I got your back. That's the one that's supporting them publicly. Okay. Now, the I got this message doesn't mean you're stating that you can do everything no matter what, in all cases, in all details. It is an acknowledgement that you will take responsibility to get it done. Responsibility means you'll do the best you can. You will figure out what parts you don't understand or don't know how to do, and you will ask for help when you need it. But it's not a question of, I was mentioning that fear-driven micromanager. What would happen when he would take over is that my role was reduced down to the level of, intern or grad student or whatever you'd say. In other words, I just did exactly what he told me to do, exactly the way he told me to do it. No thought required anymore, no initiative, no whatever, because it was his responsibility now and no longer mine. And I didn't like that. I mean, now I pushed back, but not during the crisis. And something like that, you have to wait till the crisis is over and then push back and say, look, I know what you did there, but that undercuts any chance I have of learning, of doing this right. Is there a reason you're worried about my skills? Is it, are you concerned about my lack of expertise here? Let's take steps to address that. There were other things to do, and I will get to those individual steps in a moment. Now, there's a question: how do you find out what you're really being evaluated on? One of the things that I'm going to recommend, and I might as well mention it now because it's going to come up over and over again anyway, is you need to have regular one-on-one meetings with your manager. Now, these don't have to be long. In fact, one trick I used to use occasionally to propose them was to offer to have a 20-minute meeting, because nobody ever schedules a 20-minute meeting. They'd schedule a half an hour and hope to end early. And then you could hit your 20 minutes and say, are we done, or do we still have to finish this discussion? And since nobody's going to schedule a 10-minute meeting, you probably have the 10 minutes left. The point is that your manager needs to understand you well enough to know when you are simply venting about there being a problem with a project or things out of your control or part of your normal learning process, as opposed to, we really have a crisis here. We've got to take steps to address it. And the only way they can know the difference is to know you, to get experience and understand how you react under these circumstances. Likewise, you can only understand what they really care about, what matters to them, as opposed to what they're just saying because their boss told them to say something, or they think it's a good idea. You need to know them well enough to interpret what you're hearing on their side. And this is key to building the long-term relationship so that both sides understand each other much better over time. So when you say, how do you find out what you're really being evaluated on, you ask during your meeting, hey, I'm really concerned here. I don't understand what really matters. What do I need to do to get this promotion or to get this raise I'm looking for, to get assigned to this other project I want to be on? I'd like to build up the ability to get that. What do we have to do? And that way you've reduced it to a concrete issue and you can discuss it. And then we'll talk about what happens when they don't respond well, because sometimes they won't. Now, the I got your back message, again, does not mean that you never argue. We're going to talk about how to argue with your boss in a way that preserves the constructive loyalty relationship, maybe even augments it. But as far as the outside world is concerned, we're a team. and I'll back you up whenever is necessary out there. Because this can come up, like say you're on a project that goes way over time and is a disaster, and you know that the reason it's a disaster is your manager insisted on a course of action that you knew was a mistake from the beginning. And you said it was going to be a mistake, and yeah, it didn't work. Okay, big surprise. Here comes the boss's boss, decides to come into your office and talk to you. And they say something like, oh yeah, I've already talked to your boss. I've talked to the other members of the team. I just want to get everybody's feedback, find out what went wrong before I make decisions on this. Well, this is a perfect opportunity to demonstrate the constructive loyalty, to demonstrate I got your back. I mean, think about what your manager's going through while these meetings are going on. Your manager knows the project was a disaster. They know that their own boss is now talking to all of their individual reports, and they don't know what you're going to say. They're terrified. I mean, this is a real crisis for them. Here's the thing. All you have to do is you could criticize the budget. You could criticize the resources. You could criticize the schedule. You could criticize the client. The one thing you don't do is throw your own boss under the bus. You use the term we. We decided to take this course of action and it didn't work. Okay, so we met again and decided to try this to see if that would fix it. And it didn't work either. And unfortunately, that made it even later. But then we met again and tried to go this way. You know, you use the term we, which is not lying. It really is a team effort. And if the one person who's going to know who made the decisions is the boss's boss. I mean, after all, the boss's boss knows your boss. What they're really trying to find out is about you and see if you will demonstrate loyalty, or if you tried your best, or if you took responsibility, you know, to see what your reaction is. And this is a perfect way for you to demonstrate the constructive loyalty. Now, it may go against the grain because, especially because you think the boss really is an idiot, you know, they really did make a mistake. But if you use this loyalty mechanism, the person who will appreciate it the most is not just your boss, but the boss's boss. They know all about loyalty. They're going to care about this. And it's going to really make you look good in a lot of ways. Now, you're basically giving them the message. You can count on me to be loyal. Again, part of your job, believe it or not, is to make your manager look good to their manager. Violate this at your peril, because this will make everybody look bad. And if you disrupt the relationship with your own manager, I mean, someday you're going to want that promotion, either from one low level to a higher level, or from a high level to a technical fellow, or whatever the position may be. And that's going to mean you need your boss to be in a room with a bunch of other managers, all arguing that you should get the position. And of course, you can't be in that room. You need them to be your ally. And if you are undercutting your own manager, they have very little incentive to make that argument in your favor. Whereas if they do value you, if they do know you'll back them up, I mean, think about it this way. When a new relatively high-level person is hired into a company, what's the first thing they do? They bring in a bunch of their own people. Is it because their own people are better than the people on site? Almost certainly not. Almost demonstrably no. But their own people will be loyal. Their own people will have their back, will stake their success to the boss's success and try to make it happen, and will be rewarded and compensated accordingly. And it's very clear this happens a lot. Now, enough of the horror stories. Let me give you a quick win, something you can use right away that I have found to be remarkably beneficial, way more beneficial than I would have expected. I put this under the category of responsiveness, but it's more than that. It's basically replying as quickly as you can to requests, adding whatever caveats are necessary. Now, say your manager sends you an email and it's ridiculous. I mean, they say something like, let's see, I'm going to make up a scenario. How are the advances over the last few years in AI and machine learning going to affect our primary product? Something like that. And I'm making the assumption when I ask that question that you're not an expert in AI and machine learning. If you are, I'll pick a different topic. But I mean, they're asking you something they know you're not an expert in. And this request comes in. And you're like, I don't know. How am I supposed to respond to this? And one reaction might be, look, I got real work to do. I'm going to ignore this. And the other reaction might be, well, fine, it came from my boss. I'll put all my work aside and really dig in. And neither of those are really what the manager wants. And neither of those are what you need to do. Here's basically an email template of something you can try. You start with, I don't know. I really don't know. That's not my area. However, here's what I do know. And you list the things that you're aware of. Because if anything related to IT, you're going to have some opinion about. Here's what I think. And you can draw a couple of conclusions. You know, maybe they're supported by facts, maybe they're not, just speculative. Here's where I would go to find out. See, this is your cost estimate. This is where you're letting them know the steps you would have to take. It's a very high level, rough cost estimate, but you're giving them a sense of what it would take to find out the right answer. And then you ask the magic question. Do you want me to look into it? I mean, on the AI question, I might say something like, look, I don't know, but I have noticed that the progresses in machine learning seem to be involving pattern matching. So machine learning tools seem to be very good at natural language processing or image recognition. So I think, you know, we could collect a lot of data from our customers, and maybe we'll have an AI system that could evaluate it and make it easier for us to decide what to do next, or maybe they could make a better guess at what the customer actually wants or respond to some of their simple requests, something like that. Here's where I would go to find out. Well, I know that, for example, Google has a tool called TensorFlow, and it's open source, it's free. So I could probably learn how to use that, although I know they have an API in Java, but I might want to have to learn Python. A lot of machine learning stuff's in Python. So I probably have to spend more time on that. So it'll take me a little while to come up to speed. And then the magic question, do you want me to look into it? I promise you that 9 times out of 10, maybe 95 times out of 100, the response will be, yeah, that's all I needed. I'm good. That's all I wanted. And you accomplished what you needed. You got the message out of your inbox in a timely fashion, and you were responsive. Everybody likes it when you respond, even if your response is full of caveats and uncertainties. I mean, if I'm working on, I mean, I work with a Git source code control system, like pretty much everybody does. And Git is notorious. The stuff I know how to do, I know how to do. And the stuff that I don't know how to do just seems horribly obscure, and I don't know what to do at all. And when I run into a problem like that, I have a friend I send an email to. Hey, how do I do this? And then I wait and I wait and I wait because I'm stuck. And eventually I run into that guy on a Zoom call or at a conference, say, how come you didn't answer my email? And it'd be like, oh, I've got 5,000 unread emails. Like, yes, so why didn't you answer mine? Now, I may not say that, but I'll probably be thinking it. Imagine how much worse that is coming from your boss. I mean, why did your boss actually ask you that question? Well, it could be a lot of reasons. It could be that the boss was in a meeting and another manager brought it up. You know, hey, we're looking at AI, machine learning, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe they got contacted by a vendor, you know, wants to sell them a product and they want to find out, is this worth it? Is this going to be useful for us? How long before this is going to be important? Or maybe they read an article or attended a conference meeting or something and said, oh yeah, learned a little bit about this and wonder how it's going to apply. They figure they'll find out what their own people know. Or maybe they do have in the back of their mind that they would like you to dig into this. I mean, if the response is one of those 2 to 5 chances out of 100 where the response is, yeah, I really do want you to dig into this, then you say, okay, fine. What are we going to do about my existing work? We need to plan now. We need to figure out what we're going to do. But in general, I mean, like, you ever use the Pomodoro technique? You know, your 25 minutes of concentrated work followed by a 5-minute break or whatever. I mean, I could come up with an answer to pretty much any open-ended question like that in one Pomodoro, you know, and I've been responsive, and people love it when you're responsive. Okay. I often refer to this as a good enough answer. A good answer today is way, way better than a great answer next week. It's really hard for most of us to really believe that, because in school, in our highly dysfunctional educational institutions, there was a huge penalty for ever being wrong. When the teacher asked you a question, they knew what the answer was. They were trying to find out if you could produce it and produce it in the right way, and you're always penalized if you didn't. if somebody asks you a question in the business environment, it's because they're stuck. They don't know what to do. And you give them something so that they can move forward. And it makes a big, big difference. Okay, again, I got your back when we kind of talked about, to the outside world, we're a team. So how do you train your manager to take what you want into account? Let's actually get into the details here. Well, I want to reference a discussion that happened in this book right here. This book is called The Evolution of Cooperation. It's by a professor named Robert Axelrod. This is an absolute classic in the field. I think this is the cover from the 9th printing or something like that. Really classic. And this book deals with a problem that many, if not most of you have heard of before. It's the most famous problem in the mathematical theory of games. It's known as the prisoner's dilemma. It comes up all over the place. It comes up in economics, in politics, in decision making. It comes up all over in many, many circumstances. Let me give you the basic layout. This is a picture taken from Wikipedia, just to give you an idea. All the resources on this I'm talking about are free. So 2 prisoners are captured for the same crime, prisoner A and prisoner B. And if they're interrogated separately, so they can't communicate with each other. That's important. And if they both stay silent, meaning they cooperate with each other, they each serve a year. Now, if one cooperates, like let's say A cooperates, but B betrays them, B defects, then A serves 3 years and B goes free. And that's symmetrical if B stays silent and A defects. And if they both defect, if they both tell on each other, they each serve 2 years. Now, here's the thing. If you're only going to play this game once, then the strategy is very easy to work out. For example, say I'm A and I'm trying to figure out what to do. Well, I go, well, let's say B stays silent, B cooperates. I either serve 1 year or I go free. Well, going free is better, so I defect. Well, what if B is going to betray me? What if they're going to defect? Well, I either serve 3 years or I serve 2 years, and 2 years is better than 3. Again, I defect. In other words, I defect in either case. No matter what B does, I've optimized my circumstances based on what they're doing. If you ever saw the movie A Beautiful Mind about John Nash and everything, that's a Nash equilibrium. As a matter of fact, that's an example of one. So if you're only going to play it once, yeah, you defect because that you win in either case. I mean, it's the best you can do. And unfortunately, your opponent is going to make the same conclusion. You're both going to defect. It's kind of unfortunate. But if that was all there was to this problem, Axelrod wouldn't have gotten a whole study out of it. Instead, he was looking at what's known as the iterated prisoner's dilemma. The idea is that you're going to do this again and again and again and again. And what Axelrod did is he organized a computer tournament, and he had people submit programs that had strategies for this game and had them play a round robin a few thousand times or hundreds of thousands, or whatever it was. This is back in the 70s, so it was probably only a few thousand times, and see what strategies would work. The Prisoner's Dilemma, the IPD, the Iterated Prisoner's Dilemma tournament, was won by a program called Tit for Tat. It won the tournament. And it was unbelievably simple. It consisted of 4 lines of basic code, if you could believe that. And here was the strategy. It cooperated on the first move, always started off by cooperating. And then after that, it would echo whatever the opponent did. So if the opponent defected, then it would defect. And if the opponent went back to cooperating, it would go back to cooperating. Very easy strategy to diagnose. Everybody can tell what's going on. Very easy strategy to implement. And yet it won. So Axelrod released the results to everybody and said, take a look, and I'm going to have a tournament again in another few months, and I'm going to invite contributions from the sociology department and the psychology department and political science and all these others, and we're going to try it again. And Tit for Tat won again. Even all this time later, 30, 40 years after the original study, Tit for Tat is still one of the absolute best strategies for the prisoner's dilemma problem, the iterated prisoner's dilemma problem. The lesson of the iterated prisoner's dilemma is that cooperation, which is what scores best, can emerge naturally even among outright hostile competitors, as long as both sides keep in mind you're going to do this again and again and again. That makes all the difference in the world. And I want to talk about that because I don't want you to be in a battle with your manager. If you're in a battle with your manager, you lose, because even if you win, you lose. Again, you want your manager to be your ally. You don't want to have a fight with your manager. The neat thing about the iterated prisoner's dilemma, it's an example of what they call a non-zero sum game. In a zero sum game, in order for me to win, you have to lose. It's not like that. Both sides can win and both sides can lose. Very interesting that way. The reason tit for tat is so successful is it favors cooperation, and it always scores better. It never defects first. It retaliates immediately. It doesn't wait 6 months stewing on a previously remembered slight before acting up again. No, it retaliates right away, but then it forgives right away also. See? And this is key. The retaliation part is necessary, even with your own manager. But it doesn't have to be symmetrical, because the job's not symmetrical. It can be very subtle. You can voice your displeasure privately. You don't want to threaten the loyalty relationship. The outside world thinks you're a team. You negotiate, and then you get back to work. Now, to give you an example of this, I have a friend, a woman in this particular case, who worked for one of the town governments in Connecticut. And she got an idea on how to streamline one of the processes. I think it might have been voter registration, but whatever it was, she got an idea on how to make it a lot more efficient. So she talked to her boss and guy in this particular case, and he gave her the freedom to go work on it and a budget, whatever she needed. And she went and worked independently, and it worked out beautifully. It was great. And then she came back to him and said, look, at the next town council meeting, I'd like to go with you and I'd like to tell everybody about it. And was very surprised when his response was, I already did that. He basically took all the credit for her work. And her initial emotional reaction is the same one any of us would have had. It's like, well, if I'm going to get taken advantage of like this, I'm never giving this idiot a good idea again. I mean, why should I, if they're just going to take advantage of whatever I've done? But she had time to think about it and cool off, and then go back in the next day, go into the guy's office, shut the door, again, to the outside world, we're a team. And she said, I'm not happy. Oh, really? What's the matter? See, if I'm the manager and I just got praise from the town council for a job that somebody on my team did, and that person comes in my office and says she's not happy, you got my attention. What's the matter? She said, look, I understand you had responsibility for this project ultimately. You gave me the freedom and the budget and the time to go do it. And I understand that you got rewarded, but you know what? I should get something too. And if this guy's got a brain in his head, he's going to be like, yeah, you're right. What do you want? Now, I'll get to the case where he doesn't have a brain in his head in a minute. Okay. Well, what you can negotiate for depends on the constraints in your job. I mean, I don't know if it's available to get a bonus or a prize or an award or time off or whatever. Turns out what she really wanted was the ability to escape all the low-level politics in town government. She liked the idea of working independently on a neat project that she chose, and with the budget and the freedom to do it. And he was like, great, no problem. And he gave her that. And next time she had a success, he brought her with him to the town council meeting. I mean, what had happened in that case was he'd been in the town council meeting. He was feeling under the gun that they had to justify their existence. And he was able to say, oh, no, wait, look what we accomplished. I got this neat success story to tell you about, and just hadn't told her about it, even though she's the one who did the work. But actually, as you find out, if you're in business world a while, that's pretty normal. Most managers do take credit for whatever their direct reports come up with. It's part of the strategy when managers are talking to other managers, because they say, look, I'm going to take credit for all your work, but that means when you get this job, you get to take credit for your underlings' work. That sticks in our craw for two reasons. One is we're not on the management track, and therefore we're never going to get that chance. And two, we're the technical people. Most managers I've reported to couldn't have done what I did. They could describe it, but they couldn't have carried it off. So when they take credit for it, it feels particularly galling sometimes. But here's the thing. Instead of making this a crisis, an absolute, look, I need to get compensated or rewarded or treated better, or I'm out of here. Instead of making it into an absolute crisis where the manager is going to feel obligated to dig in and justify their actions and say, well, look, you worked for me, you did the job, I just talked about it. You know, I mean, whatever, they're going to find a way to justify it. Instead, she made it clear that she wasn't happy, but it wasn't a crisis. And then she was going to get back to work. See, whether you get something from the negotiation or not, you go back to work. The message that you're giving them is that it's okay to have a disagreement, for you to push back without it developing into a crisis. What you're doing is you're telling them, this is what I care about. And when you do something that affects me in a way I don't like, I'm going to say something. But it's just an issue. It's not the end of the world. I'm going back to work now. And hopefully they will learn, and they will next time take into account that they don't want to get barked at next time, and they know you really care about that, and therefore they will try to make an attempt to accommodate you. Or they won't, but hopefully they will learn. As Jeff says, a great manager gives credit to their people and takes blame to themselves. And that happens to some degree, but if that happens, you don't have a problem, right? You don't have a conflict. I'm talking about what happens when you are taken advantage of, when something goes wrong like that. It should be the manager and the direct reports taking credit or blame for both positive and negative. Yeah, but again, if both sides do something that you could live with, you don't have a conflict. I'm trying to address the circumstance when you do get a conflict because, well, let's say things are not available. Let's say you wanted a promotion and somebody else got it and you're really disappointed, or you wanted to be assigned to a particular project and you didn't get it, or there was a raise coming around and you didn't get that. I mean, there's going to be something where you feel like you were not treated well. And it was the manager who had, if not the only voice, certainly a major influence on that decision. How do you push back? And this is how you push back. Now, before I get to a little bit more detail about this, let me mention that if you're interested in this iterated prisoner's dilemma stuff, there are many simulators on the web. This one's my favorite. There's a website called The Evolution of Trust. It's at ncase.me/trust. Warning, it plays music in the background, which you can cut off, but keep it in mind if you got people around. It's really a fun discussion of it. It actually shows the evolutionary prisoner's dilemma, where they pit all the common strategies against each other and see how they evolve over time. It really is a fun little game to play, and you get to see how you turn this into a game. And see, now there they call the tit for tat strategy, they call it copycat. Okay, so for whatever reason, that's not the term Axelrod uses, but it's the same idea. Now, in the employee-manager relationship, the idea is to establish balance. The cooperation is the I got this part. Yeah, I'll do the job to the best of my ability, letting you know when there are problems so we could replan. The retaliation I tend to refer to as pushback. I need to tell you what I care about and that you crossed me. And, if the manager's like, wow, that doesn't seem like a big deal to me. Well, you just made it clear it's a big deal to you, but it's not a crisis. There's forgiveness. You're going back to work. Now, until the next time they cross you, and then you're back in their office again. Hey, wait a minute. I didn't like that. And again and again. Now, what happens if it never gets any better? What happens if they say, well, if they're always going to go back to work, I don't have to adjust. I don't have to modify my behavior. Well, keep in mind, this is long-term. It's not necessarily about winning any particular battle here. It's influence. It's making sure that you are heard, that they understand what matters to you. And if you're going to do something, if they're going to do something you don't like, they're going to hear about it. It doesn't always work, but it gives you something to try without going to the extremes of leaving or doing nothing when you're unhappy. You have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you stood up for yourself, that this is a challenge, and you defended yourself. Now, again, the first time you do this, it's scary. It's always scary pushing back against someone who you believe has direct influence over your career. And how much you push back, you have to tune to your own individual relationship. Only you can judge that. And if you also have issues of being a woman or an underrepresented minority or something like that, again, you're going to have to tune it to whatever works that both makes you feel like you said your part and were heard, and without being treated like a pariah, like this is going to be it, without provoking a disaster on that sort of thing. And this way you do stand up for yourself, but you don't make it a crisis. Now, say they don't accommodate, they don't get any better. Well, you've also built up evidence that you were unhappy and you made attempts to deal with it. I mean, if you decide to leave, the first thing HR is going to ask you in your exit interview is, did you tell your boss you were unhappy? And that's where you'll be able to go, yeah, I did this time and this time and this time and this time, and nothing got any better. It's clear it's not going to get any better. I mean, again, this is not a marriage. This is something where you are constantly assessing, is this relationship going to work out? Are they going to get better? Are they going to learn what I care about and accommodate it, at least trying to do so? You never want your announcement that you're leaving to be a surprise to your manager. A surprise means that both sides missed any chance at all to make it better. And leaving is always harder than it seems like when you're unhappy. When you're unhappy, you think, I'm out of here. That always seems like a good idea, but the actual execution of changing to another group or another division or another company is very disruptive. And the job you are always the most qualified for is the one you happen to have at the moment. So it always feels like you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable position that you're not as good at whenever you're going to move to something else anyway. And besides, sometimes they learn. This always surprises me. I was in a position like this a couple of years ago with a manager, friend of the family type of relationship that was really doing things I was very unhappy about. And I didn't want to say anything because this guy's kind of a bully. And I was really afraid that I was going to bring down all the anger and everything on me and I was going to get kicked out or whatever. And I'm like, writing a freaking book on this. I had at least try it, to try it again. And I did, and I pushed back, but I made it friendly in a way. I mean, I kept from making it hostile. I made it clear that I wasn't happy, but this was not irreparable. We had to do something about this. And to my considerable astonishment, he bent. He went, oh, sure, okay, we could do that, which always surprises me. Most people, employees, have way more power than they think they do. Not everybody, and not in all circumstances. And there are some really dysfunctional people out there. But honestly, if you're reporting to one of those really dysfunctional people, this is another way to find that out and decide, yeah, I don't want to work for that person anymore. That I've got to take some extreme case here. So if you've already got one foot out the door anyway, what does it harm to try this out and see if you could tune it to what your own comfort level would be on that idea? Now, a few more smaller issues, and then we'll wrap things up. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to add them to the chat there. And I should mention that I will provide my email address because this sort of discussion always brings up stories, So you're welcome. Oh, how would you answer an interview question? Give me an instance where you had to convince a difficult manager to do something, and what was the result? Now, that's a very different question here than it would be in an interview, right? In an interview, interviews are so artificial. And the more senior you are, the more you know how terrible this industry is at interviewing for jobs. So, I mean, you kind of have to decide, how badly do you want this job? How honest do I really want to be here? You might want to manufacture one of those non-answer answers of, I thought we had a difficult manager and he made this terrible decision, but we talked about it and it turns out that he was just rushed and was under the gun, was being told by his own manager what to do. And we came up with an argument that was persuasive to his manager that let us proceed down a path that was far more productive. See, doesn't that make everybody look good, including your manager? Now, did that actually happen? Oh, I don't know, maybe. So again, if it's an interview, that, your answers should be considered, I suppose, in the light of what you're trying to accomplish, which is you're trying to show that you are flexible and willing to work with a manager, and you are empathetic to their concerns and their problems, and therefore can work as a team to accomplish the task for the company. And then everybody looks good. And that's what you want in an interview. You don't want to be like, oh, this guy was an idiot and I went right around him. No, don't do that. That'll terrify whoever you're interviewing with. So that sort of thing. Okay. Now, this one, I hate to bring this up, but this is a trap I used to fall into all the time, especially early in my career. Your boss is not your friend. Your boss is not your friend. I harp on it a lot because, again, it was one of my real problems. If you think your boss is your friend, there are two traps that are very easy to fall into. One of them is, if you think your manager is your friend, the first time they make a decision that goes against you, you're going to be surprised and you're going to be hurt way beyond anything having to do with the actual details of the decision. If you find yourself saying to yourself, or even to them out loud, I thought you were my friend. Yeah, you fell into that trap because you're not friends. It's a professional relationship. Hopefully you'll be operating in the overlap, but you have an agenda and they have an agenda. And sometimes they're going to make decisions that are not in your agenda. And I don't know about you, but I need the emotional distance to not take that personally when that arises. I have a friend who I really like, and I call him my friend, but he used to give me a lot of work, and as a contractor, I used to get work from him all the time. And he's based in the Atlanta area. And every time I would travel to Atlanta, I'd look him up and we'd go out to dinner and we'd split a bottle of wine and we'd have a really good time. And the whole time in the back of my head, I'm going, your boss is not your friend. Your boss is not your friend. Because I know this guy. He's really friendly. And then the next day he'll say, hey, can you teach such and such a class on such and such a date? And I'll say, oh, I got to check on that one. There's parts of that I know, there's parts I'm not so sure about. And I may have a commitment that day. Give me a couple of days. And then I'll come back a couple of days later and say, okay, I freed it up. I can go do that. And he's very likely to respond with, I had to give it to somebody else because I needed an answer right away. Now, whether that was ethical or not, it's a whole different issue. But I know this guy and I know he's going to consider his own company well ahead of anything I'm doing. My boss is not my friend. Now, that doesn't mean I can't be friendly. You also don't have to declare to your boss that they're not your friend. I mean, fine. It's my own internal protection when problems like this arise. Now, the other trap that happens if you think your boss is your friend is what I call the oversharing trap. Is that you'll tell them things you would only tell your friends. Boss comes in Monday morning. So how was your weekend? Okay, but my wife's not happy with me because I spent a lot of extra time on this work related stuff and even came to the office for a couple hours, and she thinks I already spend too much time here and the kids are getting older and all this. And of course, what the boss might be thinking at that moment is, wow, I was going to give him an opportunity to work on this high profile project that could lead to a promotion, but that's going to require him to spend even more time at the office. And I don't want to cause trouble. You don't want them thinking about that. You don't want them to have any information that governs. You don't want your personal issues to affect their professional decisions about your career. How was your weekend? Fine. How was yours? I mean, seriously, I got this and I got your back. Those are the only two messages I want to get across to my manager there. Everything else I can talk to my friends about, or my spouse, or talk to the dog or whatever, something like that. Now, again, this doesn't mean you can't be friendly. Of course you're friendly. It was for my own protection that I erect this internal barrier to protect myself. Now, on the other hand, your boss isn't your enemy either. It may seem like it sometimes, but it is not in your manager's best interest to see you fail. If it is, by the way, in those exceptional circumstances, in their best interest to see you fail, yeah, you got to get out. I mean, then you've got a real problem there. But in general, it's not. When they do something against you, it's probably because it was in their agenda and not yours. But replacing people is difficult and expensive, especially technical people. And it always makes the manager look bad. I mean, say you announce you're leaving. You say, that's it. I found another position. I'm going over here. Maybe it's in the company. Maybe it's out entirely. What's the first thing that happens to your boss? Their boss says to them, what happened? How'd you let it get so bad? What are we going to do about their projects? Do we have to hire? Are we going to have to pay a fine? I mean, again, it's all money, 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 and it always makes the manager look bad. Now, some rookie managers need to go through this a couple times to see how unpleasant it is, to learn to try to avoid it a little more. But it's generally not in your manager's best interest to see you fail. Your boss is not your enemy either. Okay, a couple of special cases, and then if there's any remaining questions, I'll try to address those. The micromanager I already basically talked about. They want to do your job as well as theirs. Now, this can be in any profession, but it's something that technical people promoted into management are particularly prone to, because here's the thing, you can't fix it because you're not the problem. I mean, here they've got a new job, or a job they're not terribly informed about, and deals with all sorts of mushy interpersonal issues that they didn't have to care about much before, and forces them to negotiate with people who have way more power than they do for limited resources, and they never seem to get appreciation. And here comes a technical problem that they were so good at that it got them a promotion in the first place. Yeah, it wasn't you, it was them. The good news is it does tend to correct itself. It just might take a long time, especially if they're politically connected. I mean, the managers' peers, the other managers, are going to be saying to that person, you can't do that. That's a rookie error. There's no way you can do both the management job and the technical job at the same time and do both of them well. That's just not possible, because eventually what's going to happen is the boss's boss is going to say, look, I hired you to do this management job. If you can't or you won't do it, tell me, I'll get somebody else. I mean, replacing technical people, that's difficult and expensive. Finding a new low-level manager, you can get 100 resumes tomorrow. And it's really another part of the reason that a lot of managers live in fear. I mean, they know they're much more expendable than they used to be when they were the ones contributing directly to the bottom line. Okay, the flat organization. This is something that IT people have a definite tendency toward, but mostly it's Silicon Valley type stuff, but it could be anywhere. They think it's a feature, and it can be a feature, but it's often a bug as well. The problem is when companies are bragging at how few managers they have, or that they don't have any managers, they're basically saying they don't really have a high regard for managerial skills. And yet somebody still has to do those lower level tasks. Somebody's got to set the intermediate priorities. Somebody's got to do budgeting and scheduling and performance evaluations and argue about raises and promotions. Somebody's got to do all that stuff. And instead of it being designed, it'll congeal. Now, in a company with 10 people in it, yeah, okay, there are no managers, because we all know who the manager is, the owner. I mean, they're the one who, they have the money, that's where it's coming from. But a 50-person company with no managers, that's a little shaky. And a 500-person one, yeah, that's a disaster waiting to happen. In a flat organization, whoever actually makes those decisions about your future, that's your manager, whether they have the title or not. That's the person you want to focus on. The last special case I want to mention is, of course, something we've all been dealing with now for the last 2-3 years, right? The remote work issue. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about how to do remote work or how to be productive working remotely. We've all worked that out in one way or another by now, and there's lots of advice on that. All I want to mention is that this idea, the tit for tat solution to the iterated prisoner's dilemma that I've been talking about, is depending on future interactions. Your boss has to anticipate how you're going to react to their decisions and take that into account. Now, if everybody's remote, you'll probably be okay, because all communication will be done through whatever the remote mechanism is in your company, a Slack channel, Zoom calls, whatever it might be, Microsoft Teams. Whereas if everybody's co-located, again, not too much of a problem. But if some are local and some are remote, and you're one of the remote people, you just want to make sure you're not forgotten. Arrange those periodic meetings. That's important for any manager, but it's really critical for the remote people. It can be virtual, but video is better than voice, and voice is better than email. Just make sure you're not forgotten about. And the last thing I'll bring up here is, I wish I knew where I found this. I'd tell you, but I don't know anymore. The best way to tell your boss they are completely and totally wrong is the phrase, that turns out not to be the case. That turns out not to be the case. You could throw in, I can see why you might think that. Try not to roll your eyes, but that turns out not to be the case. I mean, what does that say? That says, I heard you. I understood you. I tried to apply your solution to our problem and it didn't fit. I mean, it's about the least aggressive way of telling your boss they're an idiot that I've ever found. And feel free to use this on me if you disagree with all of this stuff. It really does. It's not a bad thing at all. So let me just summarize. You want to try to make your manager look good within the organization. You definitely don't want to make them look bad. I didn't really talk about violating the chain of command, but if your boss's boss approaches you with a project or a task or whatever, that's fine as long as you keep your own boss in the loop. That's the relationship that matters. That's the one you want to keep informed. They can then talk to your boss's boss about interacting with you directly, but you don't have to be distant or difficult. You just have to keep your boss in the loop. Don't trash your manager on social media. Yeah, well, this group's not going to do that. But today's kids are growing up sharing their whole lives on social media. They have to learn what not to say. Of course, you don't want to trash them inside the organization either. On the other hand, that good enough answers, the responsiveness mechanism, that's always appreciated. And it's much easier to do than you think at first. You share credit publicly, being confident that the people who need to understand will realize who really did the work. Go ahead and push back and negotiate. Don't expect the world, but do it privately. The last one is about communication strategies, which are in the book, but I didn't really get to here. And remember, of course, that turns out not to be the case, especially if you disagree about all this stuff. Any other questions, comments, words of wisdom? Heard any good jokes lately? Anything you'd like to bring up? Here we go. Nick said, are there instances where HR compliance interferes with getting the job done? Oh, yeah, because that's a sad fact of life that any experienced employee will tell you. HR doesn't work for you. They work for the company. HR's primary job is to keep the company out of trouble, which means they're the ones who enforce compliance with regulations and make sure they don't violate anything federal or state or local, whatever regulations might be. They also are the ones who do the PR to try to make the company look good to the outside world. And if you get into a conflict and think HR is going to make your life better, yeah, good luck with that. I mean, their job is to make that problem go away. And if they can make it go away by just saying, yeah, we're handling it and get you to go away, they might. So be careful with that one. That's, HR compliance interferes with getting the job done. Yes, certainly. That's, don't expect much. Now, that's not to say there aren't some really good people who work in HR. Individuals can be great, but the responsibility of the human resources department is to make the company look good and to make problems go away, to keep them out of trouble. That's not really in your favor in general. Yeah, that's kind of depressing. Any other questions or comments on there? There's going to be there's going to be a raffle for the book. I should also mention, by the way, if you don't win the raffle, here, use this coupon code, KKManage35. If you use that at pragprog.com, at the Pragmatic Programmer site, for my book, then you'll get a 35% discount. If you want to try doing KK Manage 85 and see if you get an 85% discount, let me know if that works. But if you really think it through, you'll try KK Manage 105 and see if they'll pay you to take it away. Okay. Otherwise, thank you very much. Bruce, do you want me to turn off my screen share? Are you going to do the raffle your way, or what would you like? You're muted, sir. Tell you what, I'll turn off my screen share. I'll also put my email address in the chat here, although it's on the slides as well. It's ken.cousin@cousinit.com.
Okay,
Please
there.
feel free to
Now
keep in touch.
I'm unmuted.
There you are.
Yeah. So thank you, Ken, for a great presentation here. So normally, if we were meeting in person, we'd have a big round of applause and everything. for that. So thanks for coming. Did anybody else have any questions? You can type that in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, I see Jake has his hand up. So I'm not sure. Oh, it looks like maybe he's actually clapping. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. So I think we can stop the recording now here, Ted, because the next stage is the raffle.